Welcome to LFPL's At the Library series, an ongoing podcast featuring author talks, programs, and events at the Louisville Free Public Library. For more information about upcoming events, visit us online at www.lfpl.org/upcoming events.
Dr. Adam Enders is an expert in political psychology and public opinion research and author of a textbook and more than 50 scientific articles on conspiracy theory, beliefs, polarization, and anti-establishment politics. He earned his bachelor's in political science and public policy from Albion College in Michigan and his PhD in political science from Michigan State University. He is currently associate professor of political science at the University of Louisville, an instructor in the ICPSR, that is the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research, summer program for statistical methods at the University of Michigan. Please, if you would, welcome Dr. Adam Enders.
Thank you. With this headset, I have the urge to run up here and sell you all timeshares or something. But I'll sell you something else that might be of equally dubious quality. We'll see. We'll see what you think at the end. So thanks for the introduction, Tony. I've been at U of L since 2017 or so, and I graduated with my PhD in 2016. And I've been studying what I call the political psychology of conspiracy theories or conspiracy beliefs since about 2013 or so. So I wrote my dissertation on this topic at a time when not very many people were so interested in this, right? An interesting sort of sociological phenomenon that I've noticed doing talks like this is 10 years ago, if I asked people, close your eyes and picture a conspiracy theorist, what do you see? It was like, oh, weird pimple-faced guy with a tinfoil hat in their mom's basement or something, right? And now it's like, no, it's some sort of dangerous, insurrectionist or something, right? And we think about violence and other kinds of non-normative behaviors. And part of that is just because we're more familiar with this terminology of conspiracy theories. People have more sort of, are just thinking about conspiracy theories more. And much of that is relying on intuitions about conspiracy theories and what we know about what's true and false and supported and unsupported and so on. So a quick point of clarification. What I'm going to attempt to do today is debunk 3 common myths about conspiracy theories, but what I don't do is debunk conspiracy theories. So I'm not like a paranormal researcher. You all can go to Old Louisville and take a tour, and they'll tell you about how limestone carries kinetic energy that, attracts ghosts or something like that, and you have at it, right? What I do is I study people's beliefs, right? So what do they believe? Why did they believe it? What are the ideology of those beliefs? Where does it come from? Potentially consequences of beliefs, although that's sort of tricky because there's not usually a one-to-one transference from belief to behavior. But sometimes, of course, there are consequences of beliefs that are interesting to think through. So to start, I wonder if you would indulge me just quickly here in a show of hands. How many of you would say that you believe at least one conspiracy theory? Okay, so that's about 50-ish%, which means that the other 50% of you are liars, right? So whatever you believe about this talk, you're already wrong. We can discard you, and your opinion doesn't matter because you've already shown yourself to have, bad epistemic vices. What about, how many of you think that, whether you believe conspiracy theories or not, that conspiracy theories are on the rise? Okay. Almost everybody, maybe 80-ish%. And, okay, back there. Can we maybe hold questions till the end? Yeah, thanks. One more question for you. How many of you would say that, or at least of the 80 or 80-ish, 5-ish% of you who think that conspiracy theories are on the rise, who thinks that that's primarily due to social media? Okay, so it looks like just about everybody that thinks that conspiracy theories are on the rise think that it's due to social media. Well, you are in the majorities on all counts, right? So about 73% of Americans believe that conspiracy theories are out of control. And, depending on slight differences in question wording, we find around 70-ish% to 75% say that conspiracy beliefs are sort of on the rise. We also find that about 77% of Americans believe that social media specifically and the internet more generally are to blame for the perceived rise in conspiracy theories. And then finally, a majority of people believe that conspiracy theories lead to political violence, other kinds of violence, other kinds of sort of non-normative political participation that sort of lies outside of the bounds of what we typically understand to be normal, sort of healthy political participation. Oops, did the mic go out? Maybe the battery's dead. Oh, nope, can you hear it now? I didn't change anything. We'll see what happens. Otherwise, I can project if need be. Okay, so getting a little bit of a lay of the land there. If these things are true, if any one of them are true, but certainly if all three of those things are true, I think that matters, right? I probably don't need to sell you on that so much, right? If social media, proliferation of social media use leads to more conspiracy beliefs, and more conspiracy beliefs leads to violence and other kinds of problematic or non-normative actions, then especially when it comes to violence, right? We should be worried. Violence is bad. I think it has implications, though, for regulation of the internet and social media, right? Free speech kinds of implications. So if you think that, sort of unfettered internet, social media is going to breed conspiracy beliefs, then maybe we need to have social media regulations, right? Or other kinds of internet regulations. Maybe we need to think about removing Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which basically absolves social media platforms of any kind of liability that's due to third-party content, where the third party is the users, right? So they can post things, and social media platforms are basically just sort of disinterested hosts, right? Rather than being treated as publishers or something along those lines, right? Lots of discussion about that in Congress for many years at this point, potentially amending the Communications Decency Act. Other potential policy consequences, right, or policy implications if we think that conspiracy beliefs lead to violence. Maybe there needs to be more serious or just different, more efficacious policing of extremist groups that are sort of associated in some way with conspiracy theories, or that are perceived to be, trafficking in conspiracy theories. So in 2021, the Biden administration released this national strategy for countering domestic terrorism that basically held that the single most important domestic security threat is from sort of homegrown domestic terrorist actors, homegrown sort of extremism. Of course, people on the right didn't like that, right? People on the left don't like when, Donald Trump talks about particular extremist groups, right? On the left, setting the sort of partisan or ideological kind of content of that aside, right? Policing these kinds of groups are something that we might want to do if it turns out that this sort of thing is true. What I'm here to tell you, however, is that despite the popularity of these kinds of opinions, there is really no evidence that conspiracy beliefs are on the rise. There's no evidence that social media in particular promotes conspiracy beliefs. And we don't have particularly good evidence that conspiracy theories are sort of the primary causal force behind political violence. Okay. So now you're all disappointed or something because this isn't just going to be some kind of, I don't know. Well, I'll tell you why you're disappointed soon enough, but or reaffirm why you are soon enough. But stick with me, and let's look at the evidence. But before that, some definitions. Okay, and the definitions here are the tricky part when it comes to conspiracy theories. At least one of the several tricky parts. So this is a definition of conspiracy theory that I'm going to give that I would say most people that think about this and do this kind of research can mostly agree with, right? So 2 layers of most, which is to say maybe 51% of us could agree that this is okay. So an idea that alleges that a powerful group is working in secret for their own benefit against the common good and in a way that undermines norms, rules, or laws. Lots of room for conceptual slippage there, right? And sort of squishiness, right? So a powerful group, what's powerful, what's not, right? Working in secret, okay, for their own benefit. Okay, right, a little bit in the eyes of the beholder, and then working against the common good in a way that undermines laws, right? So obviously we have legal standards for like conspiracy to commit murder or conspiracy to commit fraud, right? But not just laws, right? Rules, norms, kind of bedrock ground rules, that sort of thing. So it's important, I think, that it goes beyond just laws. Right. One of the tricky things with defining conspiracy theories is it's like all language, it's a social construction, right? So it's a little bit about what can we sort of nail down in a semi-objective way, and a little bit about, well, how do people use this term, right? Like what are we sort of collectively talking about when we're referring to conspiracy theories? So, this is what I would call the kind of formal component of the definition of conspiracy theory. Also the norms, rules, laws bit, right? If your friends get together and they plan surreptitiously a 50th birthday party, you don't call them conspirators, right? I mean, you might call them conspirators in jest, right? But we don't think about them as plotting a conspiracy, right? So thinking through those kinds of problems too are kind of how we arrive at a definition that looks sort of like this. So that's the sort of formal component. But there's something that I would call an epistemic component to the definition of conspiracy theory as well, where epistemology is a branch of philosophy that deals with what we know and how we know what we know. Okay, it's the study of sort of knowledge production, knowledge formation, what counts as true, what counts as false or supported or unsupported, and thinking through these, many, thousands years old kind of problems like that. So to sort of demonstrate the issue, the sort of epistemic sort of element of conspiracy, the definition of conspiracy theories, take a look at these 4 statements that could arguably be treated as conspiracy theories. Okay. Now, I won't ask anybody to raise hands for this one. But look at each of these and think to yourself about whether you believe each one of them constitutes a conspiracy theory, either by your definition or by the one that I just laid out. My guess is that when you're thinking about that, and not just sort of like subjectively, like, do I think it is or not, but if you think about why you think that, right, the reasoning usually goes something like this. Well, this thing is true, so it can't be a conspiracy theory, right? These ones are false. And then, they sort of meet the other parameters of the definition, the formal components, right? Secret group, kind of, working for their own benefit, against the common good, blah, blah, blah. And so those count as conspiracy theories, right? So that's the epistemic component, right? What's true and what's false. And if I did poll all of you, or we did like 3rd grade and everybody put their head down and you raised your hands, I would find that like 50% of you believe 50% of these, right? And then the other 50%, don't, and then vice versa for the other half, okay? Or something roughly like that. There would be no consensus, right? There's never been consensus. And in fact, even among my own students, I do actually have them put their heads down and raise their hand. And then they're astounded by the answers. They think that they're part of an experiment and I manufactured the result just to generate conversation. But no, there is not consensus about these kinds of ideas. So, not only do conspiracy theories sort of like have to fit that definition that I laid out, but there's this epistemological part, right? Which is to say that they're considered to be false or unlikely or maybe unevidenced, or some people even go so far as to say irrational, right? False, unevidenced, unsupported, those are not synonyms. Right? So it could be that we've done a lot of tests of a particular claim and all those tests come up negative, right? We have countervailing evidence for a particular belief. Or it could be that no one's really tested it, right? We've just sort of deemed it, somebody's deemed it, or a collective has deemed it to be irrational or crazy. That's a little bit different of a thing, though, right? Than we've actually tested this and we have good evidence against it. So, which is it? The answer is, I don't know, right? There's not really agreement among people that spend their whole days thinking about this stuff, about what the answer should be. A couple of things to think through. Absence of evidence doesn't equal evidence of absence, right? So just because nobody's tested something doesn't mean that it's false, right? That's saying, well, this isn't supported. Well, it's not supported in the sense that no one really checked to see if it was supported, right? That's a very different thing than saying, well, we did tests, right? Rarely do scientists arrive at consensus about things, right? Actually, most scientists, the fun part of the job is arguing with each other, right? Not like getting together to talk about what are all the things that we agree on, right? And yes, there's some agreement, but there are different levels of consensus in different scientific disciplines. I would say that a lot of the social sciences are on average lower consensus fields, right? We have a lot more disagreement about the core assumptions of a particular field than people that study physics do about their field, right? So maybe we're not going to have complete consensus, but what's the right probability for determining the epistemic value, the sort of truth value, right? Or the general sort of reasonableness or rationality of a claim? Do you have to have 51% of knowledge-generating bodies, of experts, credentialed experts? Do they need to agree, or does it need to be 80%, or does it need to be 100%? Who knows, right? What constitutes a good test of a conspiracy theory, right? How do we observe actions that are definitionally unobservable, right? If part of the definition of a conspiracy theory is that people are acting in secret, it's pretty hard to catch them red-handed, right? Who count as appropriate epistemic authority figures, right? Who count as people that we can reliably trust to generate evidence about conspiracy theories or anything for that matter, right? So all of these kinds of questions go well beyond the bounds of just conspiracy theories, right? Think about any kind of information. Think about trying to determine what constitutes misinformation versus, quality information. People say trust experts, right? So who are experts? Scientists, lawyers. I don't know. If you ask people, most people say they don't trust lawyers. Doctors. People say trust doctors, but they don't really like their own, right? Which is problematic. Researchers, nice in the abstract. People don't really know any researchers or come into contact with them all that much, right? So easy yes, right? Although now you know one, so maybe you don't. Judges, I don't know, people say politicians in robes, right? Maybe they can be trusted in some instances, maybe not in others. Elected leaders as knowledge-generating, trustworthy bodies. People are not so hot on this idea, right? Moreover, people seem to think, maybe it's not so much that these kinds of experts as broad categories are trustworthy or not, but some researchers, some judges, right? Some lawyers are trustworthy and some aren't, right? And of course, if you ask about which ones happen to be credible or not, there's a suspiciously high correlation between shared beliefs and the perceived credibility of particular researchers, right? But setting that aside for a moment, these are like some serious problems, right? So it's really easy to say, that's an idea that I don't agree with. It seems subjectively crazy to me, right? Which probably means that I don't believe it. I don't agree with it politically and whatever. And so that counts as a conspiracy theory, right? Things that seem reasonable to me, which is to say, totally subjectively, a belief that is the product of our own priors, our own beliefs, values, identities, does seem reasonable to me. Of course, it's all baked into the cake, right? And so that obviously cannot count as a conspiracy theory. Researchers try to get around this because it's a hard problem, right? So what if we said, okay, what if we just classified conspiracy theories by characteristics of the believers? So we find that dark personality traits like narcissism and psychopathy and Machiavellianism are correlated with beliefs in a lot of specific conspiracy theories. So if you can assess somebody to be narcissistic or Machiavellian or psychopathic, then they count as conspiracy believers, or the things they believe count as conspiracy theories. Maybe we could classify conspiracy theories as such because of the causes or the consequences of those ideas or beliefs, right? So if an idea seems weird and it causes somebody, by our judgment, to engage in violence, then that should count as a conspiracy theory, right? And if something seems weird, but maybe it doesn't cause people to engage in violence, like believing the moon landing is faked or something, then maybe it counts or maybe it doesn't, but like it doesn't sort of matter. Right? So let's just set it to the side. Sometimes, yeah. So all of these are problematic, right? Because none of them allow us to do the gold standard thing that we want to be able to do, which is to lay out a set of rules that we use to classify any given idea as a conspiracy theory or not in a reliable, even-handed way, where if I gave any one of you those rules, you would come up with the same answers as anybody else, okay? So we literally can't do it, right? People that think about this all the time. So if you want to get up and leave, you can, because this is an important caveat, right, to the rest of the talk. So what I'm going to do is say, let's just set that to the side for a moment, right? That's the professor's trick of let's table this, and then perhaps come back to it later. But I want to be upfront with you, though, about this, right? Because it would be easy to sort of skirt over this problem, right? And then just jump right into, well, what are the bad things that these are associated with? And are they going up or down? The basics, like what counts as a conspiracy theory or not, there's a lot of disagreement among reasonable people that are acting in good faith, right, in conversation with each other, that think about this all the time, that have training in, communication studies and psychology and political science and philosophy. So there's our definition of conspiracy theory. We're probably going to disagree a little bit about what counts and what doesn't. One way we're going to get around that, though, is to use a ton of conspiracy theories, right? And not just say, well, here's like the 3 I'm going to focus on, right? Let's focus on like 50. So maybe if, we have disagreement about a few of those, they're sort of, in the margins, right? Compared to a bunch that we probably do agree on. Conspiracy theory, we distinguish from conspiracy, right? So a conspiracy has the exact same kind of formal component to the definition, but the epistemological component is that it's true, it's supported, it's evidenced, right? Something along those lines. So we could think, for example, of Watergate as being a conspiracy, right? Rather than a conspiracy theory. We might think of the Iran-Contra affair as a conspiracy rather than a conspiracy theory. We could think about the Volkswagen emissions scandal from 2015 or so as being a real conspiracy, right? Or if we want to get weird, get into deeper weird car knowledge, a Pinto-related conspiracy from 1977, where the manufacturer knew about safety defects and tried to cover that up. A lot of what we understand to be sort of red-handed corruption basically sort of rises to the definition of conspiracy that I laid out, except, we have these particular legal categories for conspiracy to commit fraud or commit murder or something along those lines. And usually I think when we're talking about true sort of conspiracies, they're not quite as sexy as conspiracy theories, right? We just think about, oh, that was bad, or that was an illegal thing, and that's no good. But, it's more interesting to talk about the conspiracy theories. So, of course, there are real conspiracies in the world. Conspiracy theorists, continuing on with a couple of definitions that I'm going to use here. We don't really talk about conspiracy theorists, because that sort of label artificially dichotomizes the world. It bins the world into conspiracy theorists and non-conspiracy theorists, okay? And what we find is that almost everybody believes in at least one conspiracy theory. And the more conspiracy theories that we poll on, the more likely somebody is going to believe it, right? Even if we started with like 0. So, what is a little bit more productive avenue is thinking about the general sort of predisposition to believe in conspiracy theories. So, think about everybody in this room being sort of on a continuum where, you're really likely to believe in conspiracy theories, or you're less likely, or you're somewhere in between. And most people are sort of somewhere in between. And I should also note that even though we tend to focus on people that are really high on that continuum, the high conspiratorial people, the really, really low conspiratorial people are kind of problematic in certain ways too, right? Like, you don't want people that are not discerning whatsoever about things that are happening in politics, right? You don't want people that think, politicians basically never lie and always have our best interest at heart, right? So, the low end of the scale is a little bit problematic too. But sort of, not negotiating too much about like where people should be or something like that. It's productive to think about it as sort of a continuum, and it's something that we can estimate pretty well and pretty reliably over time. Okay, so just like the truth is sort of a continuum, right? Where like every study we do, we're stacking up another building block on one end of the little sort of teeter-totter of evidence, right? And hopefully things sort of, start moving in one direction or another, and we have a preponderance of evidence or not so much. We can think of the same kind of process with conspiracy theories, and we can sort of think of the same process with people that have conspiratorial sort of predispositions too, right? You're kind of more on one side, more on the other side, somewhere in the middle. Okay, boring definition part aside. Let's get to the tests of these 3 claims. So first is, are conspiracy theories increasing over time? And I want to be clear that what I'm asking about, what I'm going to focus on specifically is, do more people believe in conspiracy theories over time, right? Because it may very well be true that there is more access to conspiracy theories because of the internet or social media, but I would argue that that is irrelevant if we don't find that more people believe conspiracy theories over time, or almost entirely irrelevant, okay? So I'm going to focus on conspiracy beliefs. So what's one way that we could go about testing this? Compare 2 different time points, right? That's the simplest kind of test, right? We have time point A, we have time point B. Did the number of people believing in a particular conspiracy theory increase, decrease, stay the same? Of course, it's not quite that simple, right? We want to make sure that we have variation in the different types of conspiracy theories, although I really don't really like the idea of typologies because that invites an entire additional layer of subjective, right? But I guess roughly we could think about some conspiracy theories about being about technology, health and medicine, government malfeasance, right? Space, and things like that. So, we'd want to make sure that we have like a healthy mix of those different types, right? We'd probably want to check different types of lengths of time spans, right? So it wouldn't be a very good test if I polled everybody on 50 different conspiracy theories yesterday, and then I polled the same people in like 2 weeks. That's not very much time for people to be sort of changing their mind. It doesn't really tell us much. We would expect those beliefs to be pretty stable, over a 1 week period or something like that. So minimally, we want bigger spans of time, but maybe some variability. And in particular, it'd be nice if we had measures of conspiracy beliefs pre-internet, pre-social media, and then measures of conspiracy beliefs post-internet, or during internet, during social media. Perhaps variation in salience, right? So JFK assassination conspiracy theories are probably not all that animating for people these days, right? But maybe conspiracy theories relating to COVID-19, right? About elections and things like that are a little bit more, or a lot more, animating for people, right? So we want to have variance, right? We want to have some that are kind of older, some that are newer. And then some other details too, right? So some polls are sort of done on the phone, some are done on the internet, some are done face-to-face. So the idea is if we find patterns, right, moving from time point 1 to time point 2, and those seem to be pretty systematic across different types of conspiracy theories, different salience, different ways of fielding the surveys, right, and so on and so forth, then that would constitute, reasonably good evidence, however it happens to shake out. Okay, so this is what we did. Some colleagues and I, we scoured all of the public opinion polls that have ever involved a question about a conspiracy theory, going back to the 60s. Modern scientific polling starts kind of mid-50s. Although there was polling going back to the 40s and even late 30s, not exactly scientific in the sense that it wasn't sort of random sampling, it wasn't representative of the mass public as we understand it from like census estimates. So those don't work so good. We can go back to about the 60s. And feel comfortable about that. And we found every single one that we could ever find that anybody ever fielded. Gallup, Pew, any of the major media organizations that sometimes work with each other or work with other kinds of academic, non-academic, polling organizations, anything, okay? And all we really need to know is the question wording and the percentage of people that basically say they believed it or not, and that's all we need, okay? And so what we did is we found as many as we could find, and then we re-polled all those same conspiracy belief questions with the exact same question wording, and with all of the other details the same too. So, if they did their survey via a phone, we did it via phone, right? If they did it on internet, obviously those are going to apply to the ones much later. We did it via internet because there are sometimes survey mode effects that happen where you have different different responses depending on whether people are interacting with someone face-to-face or on a telephone versus filling out a survey online. The oldest one that we have is JFK assassination beliefs from a poll that was fielded in 1966. And then we've got a ton of other stuff, right? We've got Tupac's alive, John Lennon's alive, Reagan made a deal with the Iranians in 1980, right? FDR knew about the Pearl Harbor attack beforehand, aliens, moon landing, all the COVID stuff, GMOs, 5G, everything that you can think of just about. Some go back, right, to 1966. Some go back to March of 2020, right? And everything in between. So, for example, take a look at the top 3 there. Those are COVID-related conspiracy theories. We polled those in June of 2020, and then again in May of 2021. And what these columns are showing is the percentage of people that say they agree with this statement to some degree. Right? So some of these questions people are allowed to sort of strongly agree or just agree. Some of the questions are, do you believe this, yes or no? We don't show all of that. I'm not going to show you all of that on these slides, but it matches from time point 1 to time point 2, right? The important thing to look at is the difference, right? So this is the change from time point 1 to time point 2, whatever that happens to be. So each one of these goes down, the third one by 6 points, the middle by 3 points, and the first one by only 1 point. And then this final column tells us whether that change is statistically significant, which is just sort of statistical inference jargon for, are we pretty sure that there's a real change there, or are we not so sure that the change isn't actually zero, which is to say there isn't a change. What we want to see is really small numbers, like we see down here. Whereas here, anything above about 0.05 is not statistically significant. Okay, so you don't need to worry too much about that. What we're seeing here is that these two decreases are meaningful. This one, not so much. We can't sort of comfortably distinguish that from no change. So 2 out of 3, we see actually a decrease. 1, no change that we know about. Here is support for the QAnon movement. So probably most of you at least have heard of QAnon in some sense at some point. The sort of core belief of QAnon is that there was some high-level security official with the pseudonym Q, which supposedly referred to his security clearance. I'm told there is no security clearance of Q. So that's the idea behind Q, right? QAnon, and this person was supposedly doing this communication on 4chan, this image board kind of dark web thing, communicating with people about Donald Trump's battle with the deep state. So we asked people basically just on a 0 to 100, like, do you support, do you like the QAnon movement? And this is what we found, right? Again, on a 0 to 100 scale. For the most part, people are not overwhelmingly positive, right? We're looking at sort of the low to mid 20s range, right? On 0 to 100. And as far as I know, we have the first 2 ever polls of anybody that ever asked about this. The first data point is from August of 2018, and that was a Florida-only sample. But then we also have July in 2019. And so, it's not 0, but it's pretty low. And if you track it over time, again, up through May of 2021, we actually see that, it decreases. Interestingly, it's decreasing over the time point that people start caring about QAnon more, right? So as support for the QAnon movement is decreasing, we're finding that more people claim to have heard about the QAnon movement, right? And so I've got a Pew Research Center poll here on the top right that shows that there are some minor differences between Democrats and Republicans in terms of who's heard of it in between February and March 2nd of 2020, and then a pretty big jump. Fast forwarding to August 31st through September 7th of 2020. Of course, this is when Marjorie Taylor Greene wins her primary, right? And you see this flood of publications in mainstream news about, QAnon candidates and that sort of thing. Pew Research Center also asked people of those who said that they had heard of the QAnon movement, where they had heard of the QAnon movement. And the top 3 are New York Times, MSNBC, and NPR, right? I don't believe that anybody would accuse the New York Times, let me rephrase. I would venture that most people in this room wouldn't accuse the New York Times, MSNBC, or NPR in trafficking in conspiracy theories, in the sense that they are nefariously exposing people to these ideas, and therefore they walk away, their sort of unwitting audience walks away believing them. No, that's not what's going on here. People are just saying, well, I've heard about it from regular news, right? I'm not saying I believe it, I'm just saying I've heard of it, right? Because, of course, coverage is increased. Right? So a normal kind of news media dynamic that wouldn't feel weird to anybody if I replaced QAnon with anything else, right? But an important thing to note nevertheless, I think. Okay, so the main event when it comes to looking at change over time. Here are, we're not gonna go through each one of these, 37 more different conspiracy theories. We have time point 1 and time point 2. You can see the first time point, so I don't know, the very bottom one there, do you think the Reagan campaign made a deal with the Iranians to hold the American hostages in Iran until after the 1980 presidential election or not, right? 43% said yes in 1991. 12% said yes in May of 2021 for a decrease of 31 percentage points, and that's statistically significant. Okay, so we have these arranged here from, these are the positive changes over time. Humans have made contact with aliens. Between 2019 and 2020, that actually went up 10 points. Do you think the US government engaged in the assassination of entertainers who have tried to spread a countercultural message they didn't like? John Lennon, Kurt Cobain, Tupac. That went from 12% to 20% from 2013 to 2021, right? And so on and so forth. So if we don't, sit here and sort of zoom in each of these individually, the broad strokes are that of these 37, 6 show an increase in magnitude from 4 to 10 percentage points. 16 showed no significant change over time, and 15 actually showed a significant decrease over time, with the magnitude ranging from 3 to 31 points. So on balance, we see something between no change and on average a decrease over time, right? Rather than, sort of sharp, obvious increases, which are sort of our intuition, which is probably at least partially due to a lot of exposure to the idea of conspiracy theories and specific conspiracy theories through just like regular old mainstream news consumption. So the average change over time is actually negative 4.5 percentage points or so. I do want to call your attention to one in particular. So we asked in 2011 and then again in 2021 if people believe that the US government is mandating a switch to compact fluorescent light bulbs because they make people more obedient and easier to control. We made that one up, although, 11% of people believed it, right? So in some twisted way, I guess that means I'm okay at my job. 11% believed that in 2011, and then 12% in 2021 for a change of 1 percentage point, which is not statistically distinguishable from no change at all. So, you could make these up and like some people will believe it, but, this is an instance where, there's really no change. 2011, we're talking about like beginning of Facebook, or at least early days, right? We're talking about definitely early days of Reddit, right? So, the internet, social media looks very different in 2011 than it does today. So it's not like pre-post internet. It's not strictly speaking pre-post social media, but it's kind of early days, right? And we're saying, look, there's no increase with something that's sort of fabricated, which is at least suggestive evidence that the sort of predisposition to believe in conspiracy theories, right? Setting aside specific beliefs is maybe pretty stable over time. And in fact, that's what we find. So nobody was really studying this sort of thing before 2008 or so. At least very few people were studying conspiracy beliefs in a systematic, scientific way. It turns out armchair philosophizers and academics thought what a lot of people thought back then, not all that long ago, which is that this is just like a small number of crazy people. Why would we like spend our time and resources on this sort of thing, right? Again, we have the earliest data point of a measure of the general predisposition toward conspiracy theorizing. That's in 2012. And then a bunch of data points along the way to 2021. And you can see that there are really minor fluctuations there over time. It's a pretty stable thing in the aggregate. We also have some individual level data where we can track the exact same people over time, not over huge time spans, but 3-4 months. And it's also very, very stable over time. It's basically as stable as partisanship is, which is a really stable social construct. So our conclusion looking at this is that, look, there's not really very good evidence that more people believe in conspiracy theories over time, even though it might be the case that people have more exposure to conspiracy theories over time through social media and other methods, perhaps. So, this kind of gets to it's providing a partial answer to this question about social media then, right? So it doesn't really seem like social media is feeding this conspiracy beast, right, in the way that we tend to think. And I would argue that in this case, it has to do a lot with our sort of perception of other people's epistemic capacities, right? We all have a generalized tendency, just like some people have a generalized tendency toward conspiracy thinking. Even more people than have that tendency, including probably just about everybody in this room, have a tendency to think that other people are sheeple, right? That, they're not as epistemically virtuous as me, right? People are intolerant and dogmatic and stupid and irrational and crazy, right? And so, of course, if you see these things online, I mean, people must be believing these and I must just be surrounded by crazy people, right? Of course, we're always much more sort of virtuous and rational. There's not really good evidence for that sort of thing, okay? So we could turn to really, really long literatures, really rich literatures that go back to like the interwar period on propaganda, on advertising, on media effects, on communication broadly. And at the very beginning of these literatures, the theory was what we sometimes refer to as the hypodermic needle theory of media effects, right? Where people get exposed to something and then we see a subsequent change in beliefs. That's not how it works, right? If that's how it worked, then you all would just be like a mess, right? It would be impossible to go online and look at anything. You would just believe whatever the next thing is that you're exposed to. Of course, that doesn't happen, right? It's easy to say, well, look at this crazy thing that somebody posted. That's going to be dangerous, right? It's going to cause other people to believe it. But then when their crazy neighbor or their crazy uncle posts something on Facebook or Instagram, you just say, well, I don't know, that guy's crazy. I don't pay attention to that, right? But of course, that's what everybody does, right? They fall on their prior beliefs, their prior values, their prior identities, and use that as a guidepost to what is credible and what's not, for better or worse, right? So people don't believe things simply because they're exposed to them, the incidental exposure model. Again, believe me, this is not like a profound idea at all, right? If I was like sitting in a group of communications researchers or something and made this point, they'd be like, yeah, like what else do you got, man? That's not interesting whatsoever. So we've known about this for a long time. Although arguably even researchers, there start to be cracks in that foundation when it comes to conspiracy theories, right? Because it's like, well, they're just so crazy, right? And even researchers, right, perceive them to be sort of correlated with violence or causal of violence, right? And so maybe these particular kinds of beliefs are different than other kinds of beliefs, or this kind of information is different than other kinds of information. But human psychology it doesn't care about the information that it's processing. Right? It basically works the same, irrespective of medium, irrespective of the type of belief that we're talking about. So instead, we don't sort of get incidentally exposed to things and then like slip down a banana peel and now we're at the bottom of a rabbit hole and I'm crazy now, right? No, we selectively expose and we selectively ignore. Right? We make choices about what things we're interested in, which things that we think have good epistemic value, are truth, are true, are reasonable, are supported by some evidence, and things that we don't, right? People that watch Fox News don't watch MSNBC. People that watch MSNBC don't watch Fox News, right? A choice is made there. And it's not because they think that, oh, I like Fox News, and if I watch MSNBC, I might become corrupted, right? They say, no, it's just gonna like piss me off, right? I don't wanna watch this like bullshit lies, right? And then vice versa among the people that watch MSNBC thinking about watching Fox News, right? That same sort of process, which everybody agrees on when it comes to like cable news consumption, is exactly how we navigate the internet and social media as well, albeit in a slightly more complicated way than just sort of changing the clicker, right? So think about your own sort of online behavior and consumption habits. This idea of selective exposure and the importance of our prior beliefs and values and identities gets to a core concept in psychology, political psychology communication called motivated reasoning. So as an illustration, pretend that you are on a diet and somebody places a delicious donut in front of you. You've got options, right? You could say, look, I'm not going to eat this donut, right? You could say, well, I'm allowed to cheat every once in a while, right? And it's not so bad. You could say, I'll spend 30 extra minutes at the gym or go on a longer walk later, and that'll sort of take care of this, right? No sort of, conflict between my desire to be on a diet and then having this donut here in front of me. Another option is you could say this donut's not a high sugar food. So there's no problem with that. Unfortunately, when it comes to the way that we process information that we value, right, that gets at, core kind of political ideas, things that are interesting to us, we do the dumbest one, right? We say the donut isn't a high sugar food and just discard it, right? That's the idea behind motivated reasoning. Rather than search in a sort of what we tend to think of as a rational kind of objective way for information that might confirm or disconfirm a belief, we actually seek out information that confirms what we already believe, right? We ignore information that is disconfirmatory of what we believe. Or we engage in all kinds of other mental gymnastics to explain away that information, right? Well, that study wasn't very good, or it was a long time ago, or that wasn't a random sample, or that wasn't a scientific study. And of course, those things are true sometimes, right? But we take that track all the time, right? We consume media that shares our values and ideologies and avoid that which doesn't. We ignore or explain away evidence that runs counter to our ideologies and partisan affiliations. We label ideas as conspiracy theories or misinformation based on whether those ideas match our priors, make us feel confident that we're on the side of truth and morality and virtue or not, right? One of the most important sort of findings in all of social psychology going back to the 50s. So why do people believe in conspiracy theories, right? If it's not social media driven or something along those lines. It's the priors, right? It's the prior beliefs, it's the prior identities. So we could sort of, we could bracket these into 3 different categories. This isn't the only way to do it, but I like to think about epistemic, existential, and social motivations to believe in conspiracy theories. So epistemic, this has to do with our sort of truth-seeking motivations, right? Most people, if you ask them, they're more interested in knowing about the truth than knowing about things that they understand to be false, right? That's not a particularly profound point. The problem is we're not really disinterested truth seekers, right? Human psychology gets in our way, and actually evolutionary psychologists would say it's not really getting in our way. Some of the things that make us bad at learning the truth were actually really good for survival, right? Among ancestral people. It just works a little bit differently in a modern environment with a richer sort of media landscape and information landscape. So for example, we tend to engage in patternisticity. We see patterns when there's only noise, right? We tend to engage in intentionality bias, where we think that the outcomes of some event are due to some intentional cause rather than coincidence or accident. People, if you ever watch like a movie where there's a bar scene, right? They rely on intentionality bias, right? Big tough guy's been drinking and then they get bumped, right? And then it turns into a fist fight. It turns out psychologists have found out that you're more likely to engage in intentionality bias when you're inebriated. So there's at least a little bit of truth to the bar scene trope. Things like the need for cognitive closure, where people desire, on average, firm answers to questions, and they're uncomfortable with ambiguity and confusion and uncertainty. What do conspiracy theories do? They impose a particular structure, right, on a complicated, messy world. Right? Where, no, this thing, this horrible thing didn't happen by coincidence or by accident. It was this group of nefarious actors that colluded in secret to do this thing, that's harmed the rest of us, or something along those lines. So epistemic motivations. Existential motivations. We want to feel safe and secure in our environment to exert control over our environment. We don't like feeling anxious. We don't like feeling powerless. So we'll subconsciously engage in all kinds of weird mental gymnastics to sort of reduce anxiety and regain power, right? So if conspiracy theories have this ability to impose structure on a messy world or to explain our lot in life at a particular moment, they help. They help with these existential motives, right? They help us feel safe by imposing that structure. And then social motivations are probably the one that we're all most familiar with, right? Which is we accuse outgroups that we don't like of conspiring, right? Where, of course, our group is moral and virtuous and good, right? That's useful for denigrating outgroups who we don't want to win in zero-sum games like politics, right? But it's also useful for bolstering your identity, right? Like nobody wants to believe that they're the bad guys, right? So if the real bad guys are engaging in these nefarious conspiracy theories, right, and that's not me, that helps resolve this problem of, am I on the right side? Am I on the side of truth? Am I on the side, the side of good? Status management, status threat, right? Do I feel like my group is under threat in some way? That could be anything, right? From a political kind of threat, it could be an electoral sort of threat, it could be shifts in population dynamics, right? Why is that? Because of a conspiracy theory. As an example, there is a thesis that we sort of tongue-in-cheek call conspiracy theories are for losers, which involves this idea that more people are conspiratorial about the outcomes of elections after they lose than if they win, right? And of course, we all have PTSD about this from the last few years, but we have this going back decades, right? In fact, I'll show it to you here. So this is just evidence from 2020. And so I'm not even making a claim here about whether 2020 was a free or fair election or not. We can just set that to the side. This is the percentage of people who say that the presidential election will probably or definitely be free and fair, up to that point where you see a big divergence. That's election day, right? And that's the proportion of people that say that the election was probably or definitely free and fair, right? You see the same level of anxiety among different political groups in that sort of 55 to 60% range in the lead up to an election. And then after the election, huge jump, right, in the winners saying it was definitely free and fair. Big bottoming out of the losers saying it was definitely not free and fair. We have this for dozens of elections. Going backward in time. So my point here is this psychological dynamic is the human condition, right? It's not tethered to a particular point in time. It's not tethered to social media or something along those lines. So I think it's important to note that we are not as gullible as we tend to think each other is, right? We have this, again, this tendency to think, well, everybody else is sort of they're the sheeple, right? And, well, I'm not worried about if I get exposed to a conspiracy theory online, like I won't believe it, right? Because I have all the important like epistemic guardrails, right? But I'm just worried about, my idiot cousin or something. If they see it, then like they're probably going to believe it, right? So this is going to be a net negative, right? We all have a tendency to do that sort of thing. But actually, we're not that gullible, right? If anything, we have the opposite problem where we don't update our beliefs when we're exposed to quality evidence, when that evidence, right, cuts against our prior beliefs, right? So actually, our beliefs are super sticky, right? It's really hard to change people's minds. When people are likely to change their mind, it's when they have no prior knowledge about something and they don't really care, right? So if we poll people and we say, within plus or minus like $10 million, what's the national debt? People, they just get wild guesses, right? And then if you come back and say, well, actually, the national debt is this, no one says, get away from me. you're a liar, you're just trying to manipulate me, they just say, all right, whatever, it's a big number, I know it's big, and no problem, right? They update, right? And actually they probably forget it because they don't really care, right? But they're happy to take that sort of expert knowledge, right? If they don't care and they have no prior knowledge. The other time that people update is when they trust the information sender, right? But trust in the information sender, even though we like to think that we're even-handedly determining who is an appropriate, trustworthy epistemic authority figure and who's not, that is all guided by our prior beliefs too, right? So yeah, people are willing to update beliefs when they trust the sender, but who they trust, right, is dependent in a substantial part on whether they think that those people have the same values and beliefs that they have, right? And then, so there's a glass half full and a glass half empty to that, right? So I would say, yeah, there definitely are still conspiratorial people, right? I mean, we saw lots of evidence that people believe these things, right? It's not going up, right? Probably a third of you got mad at me for saying it's not going up, right? Because I'm improperly diagnosing the problem, according to your priors. But another way to think about it is, but it's, for a lot of those people, it's not going to go down a lot, right? The average downward shift was like 4.5 points. And it's because it's in there. It's in there for a reason, right? Not just because they got exposed to it that day, not just because they got sucked down this internet rabbit hole or something, right? It's because they believed that thing and they went out and found it, okay? If you look at the people that are most likely to be exposed to conspiracy theories and misinformation, again, tabling all of the difficulty of deciding what things count as conspiracy theories and misinformation, it's people that subscribe to conspiratorial and misinformation channels on YouTube, right? So it's all baked into the cake, right? The people that are most likely to be exposed are the people that say, expose me, please, right? And the people that don't want to be exposed, they say, no thanks, right? And if they are incidentally exposed, they say, this is crazy stuff, right? And there's no way that I'm going to believe this. So this sort of discussion also gets at this idea that we're naive realists, which is to say, we have this sort of default posture to believe that the truth is obvious and apparent, right? Like, I see this desk, so everybody must see this desk, right? That's an easy one. But when it comes to politics, for example, it's not so easy, right? It's not so apparent. And that's not a very good assumption. And when we operate under the assumption that the truth is apparent and obvious, then if somebody disagrees with us, there's two reasons why that must be true. It's because they're stupid, gullible, irrational, or insane, right? Or they are nefariously and self-servingly ignoring the truth toward their own selfish ends, right? But that's not really the right way to sort of behave, right? Especially if we're all doing this sort of thing. So if there's, this is a course, I guess, so I should try to teach you something or leave you better people or something. I would argue the knowledge would make you better. But if there was something I would sort of challenge you with, I guess I would say, try to remember that everybody around you is not as gullible as you think. They're actually much less gullible than you think, in the direction where that's actually more problematic, right? And also, the truth is not so obvious to people. If we disagree about it, that means it's probably not obvious, right? So, we have this tendency then to sort of summarize this, right? To think that exposure leads to beliefs, and then beliefs lead to sort of deleterious behaviors, right? But the argument that I've just sort of made is, well, actually the beliefs are due to these things, right? The priors. And also the exposure is due to the priors, right? And so the exposure might reinforce the beliefs, but the exposure is itself downstream psychologically of the priors. So yes, we do actually find correlations between belief in lots of different conspiracy theories and support for political violence. But that's due to these things, right? That's due to violent people, right? Or people that have no problem acting in sort of deleterious ways, or that have, I don't like to pathologize people too much, but like people that have, other kinds of psychological characteristics that predispose them toward violence, or for whom violence is an attractive outlet for disagreement. So a couple of just sort of broad conclusions here. People aren't really more conspiratorial today than they were in the past. I suspect that if we could stretch our analysis back 100 years, we would actually find a lot more of a downward shift in conspiracy beliefs when levels of education were much lower, right? Literacy rates were much lower. Newspapers were literally owned and run by political machines, right? There weren't any professional journalism schools, which means there weren't professional journalistic standards that involve things like objectivity, as difficult as that is to achieve. The other thing is that conspiracy beliefs have the same DNA as other beliefs. So in some sense, I'm kind of fraudulent because I study conspiracy beliefs, but I'm arguing that beliefs are beliefs, you know? They have the same sort of dynamics in terms of why people believe them and when they believe them and potential causes and consequences. So, you know, even though we look at things and we think this is just like so fantastical and crazy, right? Sort of to my subjective priors, right? That's probably true of lots of other claims that people could make. We're not the best at reasoning toward the truth, but that doesn't mean that we're necessarily gullible or irrational. And to the extent that we do see some more obvious kind of changes in the prominence and importance and potential consequences of conspiracy beliefs, it has a lot to do with the sort of top-down, elite-driven political environment, right? I would say that, look, if you could make elected leaders not traffic in conspiracy theories, then conspiracy theories, a lot of them sort of go away, right? They have a lot less importance. They're a lot less interesting to people, right? Because they're not existential, right? They're not serving those existential motives anymore, right? Because it's not political outgroups that are doing it to us, right? They're not serving the social motivations anymore because it doesn't bolster my in-group or my party because it's not a thing that we're even really talking about, right? So you move on to something else. Okay, hopefully you aren't all too mad at me. I appreciate you coming out.